So what's the average cost of car insurance in the United States? I actually have a little bit of a cheat sheet because I had to compare several different options because there was no straight answer that I could find online. I used 5 different companies, and let's list them to give you kind of an idea of what the data that we're using to come up with these numbers. So the companies that I'm using here is Bankrate, Forbes, NerdWallet, Insurance.com, and Value Penguin. These are all comparison websites, and they have access to a lot of data because they allow companies to do a lot of comparisons. Now there's a couple tricky things in here, and actually at the end I'm going to go over some of the factors that make a big difference on why the rate is what it is. Because none of these people or none of these companies are comparing the rates in the same fashion. So let's start off with the average of what each company says is the average. According to Bankrate, the average cost for car insurance for full coverage is $2,543 per year. If you're going to do state minimums, it's only $740. Forbes said it was $2,150. NerdWallet said it was only $1,982. We had Insurance.com said $1,758, and then Value Penguin didn't even give us a number. That's when we compared the actual coverages of the standard policy. Now, when you go into the state minimums, for those of us that aren't looking for that full coverage options, we've got Bankrate saying $740 a year, Forbes saying $467 a year, NerdWallet $549, Insurance.com didn't even give us a number, and then Value Penguin said $767. So which one's the real number? Let's dive in and show you how some of these are right and some of this is just old data. By the way, I actually organized this as updated articles, so when I did a search for these companies and I started looking into it, I asked the search that the post had to be within the last couple months. So according to their updates, this should be accurate data, although that's not exactly the case. The first thing is I want you to be careful if you're ever searching these things online is that these companies are designed to get you to fill out quotes. I have a quote in the link description below as well. And yeah, every video I recommend that as an option for anyone that could want that information. Now, at the current moment, I don't actually sell the data where these guys are actually meant to make a profit off of, and they sell the information to different carriers. Essentially what I do is I connect you with an agent, or if it's my agency that we're licensed in, we'll connect to one of my guys. Knowing that, you're gonna see the very first thing that they always say is, oh, here's the top 5 companies and here's the best prices. All right, go get a quote. It tries to get you to instantly go into that quote phase versus doing the research part. According to this, if you look at the differences, the majority of them compared the standard coverage, which is bodily injury of $100,000 per person and $300,000 per accident. That's the most common I've seen. Now, in certain states like Michigan, it doesn't cost a lot to upgrade. So in those states and other states that don't have a large emphasis on the cost of the liability coverage, then you're gonna have a higher average. That's one of the parts that we're gonna compare here in just a moment. For property damage, I was actually shocked. So the Bankrate one only did $50,000 for property damage. It's very common, and it's actually very possible if you hit 2 cars in an accident or are liable for a couple more than just one vehicle or a really nice SUV, you're on the hook for anything above the $50,000. Personally, I don't think that's a good option to even compare, but that's what a couple of these guys used. So Bankrate used $50,000, NerdWallet used $50,000 for property damage, and then my least favorite was Value Penguin, used only $25,000 for property damage. That's putting yourself at a high risk. Now that's the data that they're using to compare. One of the reasons we're seeing these prices are so different is they're comparing different coverages, different age ranges, different locations, different everything. Not one company's gonna give you the right number. Now I already know you're like, all right, just get to the point, what's the numbers? Those are the right numbers based on the coverage, but if you're looking for just that flat number, $2,500. Honestly, I think at the end of 2024, the average cost for car insurance is gonna be about $2,500 per year. Now, larger states like Michigan and Florida and Texas and Alabama, those are like your high states. Actually, Michigan just trumped everybody again in an article that just said we're number 1 again. Woohoo, we're the most expensive. And those costs are going to be closer to $3,300 to $3,500 per year based on the coverages that you need. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily get those prices. What you need to do is figure out one of these first pieces, which is what profile fit are you for the right company. I'll give you an example. Michigan is one of the highest costs for car insurance. I actually pay less than 20 some odd hundred. So I'm not the perfect fit for a lot of companies. I am a good fit for a few companies, and knowing what right companies that you have to look for is going to make all the difference. That's why if you are shopping, I put that link in the description below. Feel free to check it out. The best route to go is to work with an independent agent, and that's what that link is for. It connects you with an independent agent that shops multiple companies. I did a research at the back and I was going to tell you at the end, but out of the companies that they said were the best, 4 or 5 of them were actually just companies that work with independent agents. So one phone call, you can shop 5 of the 10 best companies without having to think about it. That's usually the route that most people will go. But according to these, let's just give you some data. So Bankrate was saying 100, 300. That's if you hurt someone, it's a bodily injury of 100,000 per person. So that pays that medical, and it's up to 300,000 per accident. So if there's multiple people in the car, you've got those limits of liability. That's the common. Now, I don't agree with the 50,000, but that's what they used. They used a $500 deductible for the full coverage option. So if you have comprehensive and collision, they just did a $500 deductible across the board. They're using a 2022 Camry and they're using clean record. Every one of these companies used a clean driving record. There's a strategic piece to that. Most of us don't have a clean driving record. It's about a 50-50. But in this case, why would we use a clean driving record when a lot of people don't have one? It's because they want the numbers to look lower. Because if I tell you that the average cost of car insurance is $2,200 when I really know it's $2,800 and I can skew the numbers to make it $22, that will cause the person that's only paying $2,200 to be like, wait a minute, if everyone's $22 and I'm $28, I need to look around. Let me just go fill out this quote. Once again, keep in mind, on the internet, a lot of it is designed to promote to you. Yes, good, valuable information, and a lot of the stuff they share is really helpful. Just take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because it is a marketing system. So in this case, they were a 40-year-old. When we go to Forbes, here's the difference, is they did a little bit better coverage. Actually, there's a little bit more than the rest. And they were about 21, just short of $2,200 a year, 100,000 per person, 300,000 per accident. They upped the property damage to 100,000. That's what I would personally carry, that or higher. And they've got 500 deductible. They just used a RAV4, didn't give the year, they just said RAV4. Clean driving record with everybody else. They didn't give an age. And then when they did the minimums, they did the state minimums. So when they share the minimums, this 467, that's why it's so much lower than everybody else, is because in one state, the minimum might be 25 and 50. In another state, it might be 50 and 100. So depending on the state, their average is going to be a lot less expensive. NerdWallet was very similar, except they did a $1,000 deductible across the board, so they actually lowered the price that you would think. So that 1982 should have gone up. Changing that deductible makes a pretty big impact in a lot of states, so that's going to skew the price a little bit based on what we're talking about. Insurance.com, honestly, scratched that one off the board because they used a third party, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But the third-party data was from 2022, so I can't tell you. I don't know why it says they updated it. So they updated the article that said it was a newer article, but the data that they used still to rate everything, instead of going through and rewriting the article, they just updated something else. So all the data is honestly old. Back in 2022, according to them, based on the 100, 300, property of 100, 500 deductible, they actually had good data. 2016 Accord, a 40-year-old clean driving record, was about $1,758. It's gone up quite a bit since 2022. Value Penguin was my second least favorite, not because the data was wrong, but because the coverages that they're using. It was a little confusing. From what I understood, they're quoting 50,000 per person and 100,000 per accident, which is the lowest that you can get almost everywhere, give or take a couple states. They're doing 25,000 property damage, which to me is a high risk. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It's your choice if you pick it, but it just puts you in the boat where you're gonna have to pay out if you have a big claim. They added uninsured motorist of 50 and 100, so that kind of evened out what their pricing was, but it still didn't make sense why they did the lower coverage. 500 deductible, they used a 2015 Honda Civic, and then their average person was 30 years old. So their prices was a little bit skewed higher and lower based on the criteria that they're using. But once again, they didn't do the full coverage option, so they just did the state minimum at $767. So what are the main factors that insurance companies are looking for when they're actually checking your information? Let me show you the difference. If you're going to go for full coverage, which is comprehensive and collision, there's a swing of 79%. The PLPD, personal liability and property damage, the state minimums, these 740s and the 540s and the 460s and all of these low numbers are fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But if you go from that to owning a car with full coverage and having to have that 500 deductible, based on the risk that you are, you're looking at almost as much as anywhere from 40 to 79% more. You're almost doubling the cost that you're paying for insurance. The number one piece that I think is the most important is the fitment. That's where I talk about these profiles. Because if we take all these things, we've got the location, the driving history, the violations, the car that you have, all of these pieces we're going to talk about. If we package them all into a folder and we say, this is the profile of this person, and I put them in a company, That company might be like, ooh, rejection, we don't want that. That's not our fit. But by law, we have to give them a number depending on the state that you're in. So here's $10,000 a month. And there you go. It's not meant to be offensive, but it's meant to essentially say, that's not our type of person. And then I put it into another company, and that company might be like, oh, discount all day long. We love this guy. This is our perfect fit. So every company has a different criteria that are different fits. Now, it's also every company has multiple criteria. So there's different tiers inside of companies. And sometimes you might see where you have a claim or an accident and your price goes down. Not common, but it has happened when I've shopped people because they went from being the lowest person in a top tier base where that pricing model was built around all of the low risk type people. And then they got knocked out of it into kind of a middle tier rating, but they were the best person in that tier. And the rating model gave a discount or gave discounts differently that fit that person better. That's why working with an independent agent is what most people lean towards because of that reason. That's not to say that your farmers and state farm agents aren't bad people or even not competitive. It depends on state. Each state's different. But in the majority, to save time, most people lean towards that brokerage or that agency or independent agent, as you call it. Location played a 55% difference from these stats when I looked at the difference between Ohio to Michigan to Virginia to Texas to all of these different states that we're looking at. I'll give you an example. Ohio was about $2,000 per year for the car insurance. Michigan was over $4,000 per year. So you're doubling the cost from one state to the next. Once again, it depends on the person, the driving history, that profile for the right company. Not all the same companies are in Michigan that are in Ohio. A majority of them are, but it can vary. Driving history played a 40% difference. If you have an accident, that can bump up your price 20+%. If you have 2 accidents, 30, 40, and I actually have a video I'll link that goes over the numbers if you want to get the actual pricing, but that'll go up to 40% higher based on the claim history that you have. Obviously, you're like, okay, well, what's next? Tickets? Exactly. Tickets, although it didn't make as much of a difference, was 21% because tickets don't necessarily mean claims. Tickets, 15 over, 6 over, 5 over. Yeah, I call them freebies because the insurance companies will rate for them. Yes, there's a chance that this many people that have a speeding ticket are likely to have an accident more than the people that don't. It's all based on the company and the fitment. But once you get into the 16 miles and over the speed limit, then it starts to get a little bit riskier because if there is an accident, usually someone's injured. And if that's the case, they gotta calculate the price based on something like that. The part you'll never see an article talk about is the coverage by law. So every state has different laws for coverage. One state minimum is 25 and 50. Another state is 50 and 100. Some have reduced medical, some have increased, some have personal injury protection, some have med pay. There's all of these different coverages that some states require different pieces. So where that location matters, that's where we're talking about the state and the minimums you have to carry make a difference. Age played over a 56% difference in cost. So from a 16-year-old, you're gonna pay over double what a 50-year-old would pay. A 72-year-old, you're gonna pay about 20% more than what a 50-year-old would pay. If it makes sense, the 50-year-old's that sweet spot, 30 to 60. That range is really that sweet spot to where the price starts to stay about the same as long as you have good driving history. Credit, nobody loves it, but it's part of the industry. They've tied credit to costs and bills and, I gotta pause my payment, I gotta do this for those that have bad credit versus the person that has really good credit typically has a larger income, pays it in full, doesn't wanna think about it if the price goes up, that's fine. I don't care about that 30% increase. I'm worried about this over here, just pay it, keep moving forward. So there is a difference in cost of value because these are companies trying to earn an income. And there's rules and regulations, but that can play up to a 50% factor. Not as big as everything else, but it impacts pretty heavily. If you have very low credit, the right company will give you a better deal versus if you have really good credit. And that's about a 50% swing from someone that's going to pay the difference depending on credit. And if you're in the insurance industry, I'd love to hear a comment below and let me know. I get it. Credit isn't actually the real number that we're using. It's called an insurance score. And there's a combination of that. I'll link a video that actually goes over what percentages those are to each piece. And the last piece is the car plays about a 36% difference in the cost. That's actually the lowest of it all. A lot of people think that if I get a really nice BMW versus a standard Kia, am I gonna pay that much more in insurance? Yeah, you're gonna pay about a 36% difference from one to the other, but the price difference isn't that large. You're talking about $600 difference per year. That's $50 a month. So if you are okay with a higher car payment of $50 per month and the possibility of it going up or variation, because insurance doesn't ever stay the same, you're going to be around that $50 to $80 a month more, and that's for the nicer car that you may want. And I already mentioned it too, is the companies that they shop around. Every company has given their options and their opinions on companies, and I'll just list the majority, the common ones that I saw. So the most common companies that you're going to see them shop across and recommend as the most competitive companies is Travelers, Progressive, Nationwide, Mercury, Allstate, Farmers, American Family, Geico, State Farm, and USAA with an asterisk, because you have to be part of the military or some sort of military background connection to get into theirs. Now they're also missing AAA and New Jersey Manufacturer and a lot of these other companies that are decent companies, but the most common competitive companies in this range of what we're talking about are those companies. And that's where out of these 11 companies I just mentioned, 4 or 5 of them are usually tied to an independent agent. Some of them you have to go directly, and that's just picking up the phone, spending the 20 minutes talking to their rep and figuring out if they're a good fit for you. So what is the next steps? What do I do? Well, if you're just looking for more information, you want to know the exact amounts, like how much does a speeding ticket charge me? How much does 2 accidents cost me? How much does having a lower credit score cost me? I actually did a fully in-depth video that is going to go over it right here. If you want to learn more about that insurance score that we were talking about, that actually does play a big factor. I'll put my credit and insurance score video right there. Let me know your thoughts if I missed anything in the comments below. Otherwise, I'm Mark with Think Insurance. I'll see you in the next one.